Hello, today's short episode covers one of the very basics. We're going to look at 3 questions that have sort of the same intent, but create very different impact. So stay tuned.
This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a resource for modern, busy people leaders like you who know that just directing people simply does not work in the long run. We provide focused skill practice and the relevant thinking models, so you will ask better questions and make your team shine. Freshly served to you by IntelliCoach.org from hot and spicy Singapore.
Hello and welcome back to the Coaching Leader Podcast. So this is Mike again. We're getting closer to Christmas already. I can't believe that this seems to be the 11th episode of the podcast. Amazing. Well, I've got so much content here, and today I'm focusing on something small but very important. You know, when you learn a skill, you want to get the foundations right. And today's podcast is about one of those very foundations. It's very simple, but has really dramatically changed the way how I ask questions. Now, imagine yourself being in a meeting with somebody, maybe with a team member as a leader, and you've just shared some ideas, some new strategy that you're going to implement, and at the very end, you want to know whether what you told them was useful to them. Or you want to understand the usefulness to the other party. What will you ask? So there are a couple of options here, and we'll look at 3 options and understand how they differ in impact. Now, the first thing we could ask is, was it useful? 3 words. Was it useful? Now, this kind of question is, and we know that from grammar, a closed question. What might it generate? Well, there are 2 options. People who are not very talkative, they will take the easy way out and say, yes, thank you, boss. It was very useful. I really appreciate it. Or they might just say, yes. Full stop. Now, we have people who, despite of a closed question, will simply talk. And I personally know friends, I know even family members who do that. And for them, a closed question is still an invitation to share and to talk. But other people will take this closed question as an invitation to just say one syllable, and that might be yes or no. And one thing we talked about in the past, what influences that choice is also trust. How comfortable does the person in front of you feel to talk? And they might just take the easy way out. And that might be very laborious for us. On the one hand, if we want to get more information out of the other person, because then we have to ask follow-up questions that are sort of not too intrusive, or we might just assume the answer is correct. So let's say you work with a team member and you ask them, so was it useful what I shared? And the team member looks at you and says, yes, it was useful. Very likely, and that's something that's really a truth in human relations, the truth is always gray. There is no black or white. Very likely, some things were useful, some things were not. But you only gave them one choice. You gave them black or white. So what's their choice to make? To say it was not useful and be, sort of almost slap you in the face and say, nah, this was not useful to me? No, people wouldn't do that. They will rather than opt to please you and say yes. They might secretly hope you ask a follow-up question, or maybe in that moment you just say, with satisfaction, okay, good, let's move on then. So was it useful? That kind of closed question is not useful if you're really interested in accuracy, because we're talking not about a black and white matter here. You've probably talked about a lot and you need to understand more. Closed questions, to remember, are useful when we want to confirm an understanding, when we want to close a topic out without needing to go deeper. But in this case, it might not be useful. It might give us a false impression of somebody else's opinion. And that's especially the case in a leader-team member relationship. And a team member is in a low lower, not necessarily low power, but lower power position than you. And they always will think, will I say no? Do I need to open a Pandora's box right now and say no and risk maybe a small argument? Maybe not. So our first question was it useful? And yeah, coincidentally, that's not a very useful question, isn't it? So the next choice we could make is, you might think to yourself, I shouldn't ask, was it useful? Mike always told me to ask open questions, so let me ask one. And you look at your team member and ask them, so how useful was it? And your team member looks at you and they say, very useful. Thank you. So we have actually almost the same situation here. I've asked an open-ended question which should be better. It's not better necessarily. Because if a question allows the other person to answer with a single syllable, in my view, it's still a closed question, even if grammatically it's an open one. So how is often not a good way to ask if you want content. So how is also not a very useful question. But yet we do that all the time. And by the way, that first example, was it useful? We also do that all the time. Do you remember in meetings when you ask at the end, do you understand? Yeah, and we get nods from everybody and people pack up their things. And we believe we are at a final agreement state. We actually don't know that much here. And was it useful? And how useful was it are very similar in impact. They don't give us much data. They are more closed than open questions. So what can we ask instead? What's left? If we go through the different types of words we can use to start questions, how, when, where, there's one that's really useful that was left. How about what? So if we ask, what was useful? How might that differ? So here, we don't give the other person an easy way out. When we say what was useful, we focus on content. Now, the other person might still say nothing, or might still say everything. So how can we respond to that then? So here we can get a little bit more creative. So we can simply ask, what were the top 2 things that you found most useful? Or what would be the one thing that will help you out of this meeting to move forward? Or what else might be useful moving forward? Our skill in asking questions comes in here how to craft this question. And you might tell me, Mike, this sounds that will probably take very long. But you can design this question to be very crisp. Something which I usually do at the end of a conversation, a coaching conversation, is to ask, what was the one key thing that you took away? I don't ask them, what were the key things you took away? Or what were all the things that you learned? I ask them, what's the one thing? If you can only tell me one thing, what would it be? And that helps people to focus. And that might only be one sentence or 2 sentences that come back. And I've realized that myself in meetings. I've run an online coaching workshop just last week where I illustrated that exact technique, asking 3 different questions. It was an online Zoom session, multiple participants in here. I asked first as a debrief, so did you find it useful? And people nodded and said yes. I said thank you. The next thing I said, so how useful was it? One person looked up and said, yeah, pretty good. I think I liked it. I learned a lot out of this activity. Full stop. And then I looked at them and said, so tell me, what was most useful? What was the single most useful thing out of this last 5-minute activity? And they thought for a while, and then somebody spoke and they shared something. And they talked. They talked for 2 minutes. And afterwards, I've asked them to observe the questions that I asked themselves. And they found it quite illuminating to see in real life how these questions land. We wanted to generate conversation, content, and in that setting even, everybody was there and they wanted to talk, they wanted to share. They were here to share in that meeting. Yet, the question itself did not prompt them, did not help them to open up. So we have a real big role here, and this seemingly grammar word choice has a big impact in the way how other people respond to us. So one of the key things that I always do is make sure that I design questions in a very deliberate way. If I want clarity and crispness, then I might choose a closed questions to finalize a topic. So how do you feel like moving on right now? I might ask. And that's more of a closed question. So I hope this little illustration is something that, again, was useful to you. These small differences make a huge impact, and it's really one of the building blocks of coaching and of smart conversation especially between a leader and a team member as well, because some team members we have to draw out, and it's nothing negative. And if we use a specific type of question that's more closed, we might blame the other person for not talking, but in the end, we contribute to it because we're asking questions that don't help them open up or don't think about content. So what can you do? I think go out there and practice. And I would like you to think in the next conversation that comes up. Maybe that's with your partner because you're at home. Maybe you're on your way to work. Maybe you're on your way home from work. Think about the next conversation that you have with a real person and how you could experiment with this. How you could ask more what questions. And as in the past, I think I want to give you just 30 seconds to think about that. So think about the next conversation where you could try experimenting with this, with a really useful what question. Today was a shorter episode, but we looked at 3 questions that sort of had the same intent to find out from somebody else whether they found something useful. And we showed that there's a big difference in the way we ask our question. Because if we want to generate content, we have a role. We have a role in helping somebody speak up. Now, again, I wanted to just close this by saying trust, again, plays a big role. Because with somebody who you have no trust with, really on bad terms with, it doesn't really matter how you ask. They will be very protective of themselves. And they're simply asking a question with what doesn't make any much difference. And you know that yourself. Here, you need to use your smarts to understand how can you build trust. And that's more a matter of consistent acting and acting with integrity. Say what you do and do what you say, rather than asking questions more intelligently. So, as I said before, coaching requires a little bit of trust. But in the end, coaching also creates a lot and amplifies trust, because if we use it with a coaching mindset, it means we are showing sincere interest. Always remember that. And people will feel that in you. If you show real interest and your questions are not just a tick box exercise, you are using coaching as it's supposed to, which is a trust accelerating instrument. All the best with your experiments, and I hope to see you and hear from you soon. Bye.
You have been listening to the Coaching Leader Podcast, your resource to activate strengths and coaching skills in leaders. Head over to IntelliCoach.org to check out our blog and offers. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Thank you for tuning in.
Hello, and thanks for staying a little bit longer after this episode. Yeah, and I'm talking to you specifically. You are listening. And I find the second part of the episode again so interesting because it feels like the first part of the episode about the content. It is like you and I, we are on the podium in front of an audience and we are talking with each other. Yeah, and we are very focused. And now at the second part, it's like both of us will just sit next to each other, grab a glass of our favorite beverage, and just talk. So it's an interesting contrast, and it's strange how this kind of framing can differ conversation. I wanted to talk quickly about the episode itself, my one thing, and potentially some business updates too. So the episode itself, I find it very interesting. This session or this kind of lesson about the different impact of questions is so meaningful. I see the difference every time when I help leaders learn coaching skills and they try this and they use their existing conversation patterns and they ask these closed questions and they have a direct impact in the person that they're talking to. People respond. They might not realize they're being asked a closed question, but they respond in a different kind of shorter and a less reflective manner. This is one of the easiest things also to observe. So when we do coaching training, we usually have a group of 3 or even 4 people. One person coaching, then the other person is the coachee, and then we have 1 or 2 observers. And something which I always ask the observers to do is not just to rate the coachee or the coach. Look at the questions that were asked and see what kind of impact they have. And this kind of observation is also training another coaching skill, which is to observe without judgment, to observe with curiosity, and also to share without judgment. Because we don't want to say to the coach, that was rubbish what you did. You asked 5 closed questions in a row. Haven't you listened earlier? That's not the kind of feedback we want to give. We want to give feedback in the sense that I observed you saying to her after 2 minutes, do you think you could do it differently? And not sure whether you noticed, but your coachee had a difficult time responding to that. Or was actually, she was thinking for a while and she just said, no, I don't find it difficult. And that was pretty much end of the story. And I'm wondering, asking you as a coach, what could you ask differently? Yeah. So I just wanted to illustrate that to you. This breaking that pattern of asking questions that are actually aligned to our intent. And our intent might be really to generate somebody's content, help someone talk. And if we're asking questions that allow them to wiggle themselves out, it's not just their fault. It's not just them to be passive aggressive. Maybe we gave them a very easy time to get away with saying very little. It's small, but it's actually one big element of the coaching leader training that I do. It all starts with the basics. And with coaching, it's like anything else. You do 20% really well, that takes you 80% of the distance. And asking questions, really basic questions, is one of those examples. Now, there's a lot more in the 20% than just this example, but it is an important distinction. The next item, I just wanted to quickly talk about my one thing that I'm working on right now. And leading up to Christmas, I have sort of a personal deadline. I take Christmas also as an opportunity to reach out to friends, previous colleagues, business partners, and just say hello. And this time I want to be a bit more deliberate and make it more fun. There's so much noise out there, and I'm working on right now to go live with this new brand with IntelliCoach, which really means a lot to me, and I'm working very hard on it right now. So the podcast will go live, I think, with friends and family and colleagues in a few days from now when I share it first. And what I'm focusing right now, leading up to Christmas, is just getting my webpage up to a certain standard, a minimum standard. And again, what I really liked and shared before is I love now to design in sketching. And I've been following this really